From what we know of history, most of it was not particularly good or peaceful. Nevertheless, it is an archaeologist's job to dig up our past, regardless of how uncomfortable or even downright abominable it turns out to be. So, if you want to change the way you see history, well, just stay tuned, because today, we're going to take a look at 15 of the creepiest recent archaeological discoveries that will make you wonder, what my history textbooks didn't tell me. Let's start off with number 15, demons and sickles. Burial practices in 17th century Poland took a dark turn when archaeologists unearthed 5 skeletons with iron sickles placed across their necks and hips. Clearly, these people were meant to stay buried. The dead included 2 women in their 30s, a man in his 40s, a teenage girl, and an elderly woman. The sickles weren't meant to harm them in life, but to stop them from rising in death. Initially thought to be vampire burials, scholars now believe these people were at risk of demonization. Poland was going through wars, famine, and plagues, and when people died suddenly, especially from disease, they were feared. Christian in name but still clinging to pagan superstitions, villagers took no chances. Unlike traditional vampire burials, these bodies weren't mutilated or isolated. They were part of their communities, just buried with extra precautions. The sickles served as wards against evil spirits, ensuring the dead stayed dead. Number 14. Mass female sacrifice in ancient China. When archaeologists dug into the Shimao ruins in China's Shanxi province, they weren't expecting to stumble upon a horror show. But that's exactly what they got. 80 female skulls used as building material. Dating back 4,300 years, the brutal mass sacrifice likely occurred to commemorate the city's founding. The victims, all beautiful women, were probably rounded up, executed, and repurposed as decoration for the city walls. What's even more unsettling is that China was already an advanced civilization at this time. The Xia dynasty was in full swing, while most of Europe was still fumbling with primitive huts. Yet here, in a thriving society, mass human sacrifice was still very much on the menu. It makes you wonder, how many other grand cities were built on blood? The Shimao ruins prove that beneath the silk and splendor of ancient China, there were rituals dark enough to make anyone shudder. Old and new, both Chinese are scary. Number 13. The South Korean man buried with his noblewoman. Most ancient cultures believed in taking their servants to the afterlife. Usually, that meant sacrificing slaves, warriors, or concubines to be buried near their masters. But in South Korea, archaeologists found something different. One man buried right beside a noblewoman. At first glance, he seemed like her equal, but then the unsettling truth surfaced. He had no personal belongings. That meant he wasn't her husband, a relative, or a respected figure. The likely scenario? He was a sacrifice. 2 chilling theories emerged. Either he was a devoted servant forced to die with his mistress, or more disturbingly, her lover. If the second theory holds, that means the moment she died, so did he, whether he liked it or not. Imagine knowing that your partner's death meant your own burial, alive beside them. Would you ever be able to relax, sleep, even enjoy a date night? Some ancient traditions were romantic in the worst possible way. Number 12. The War at Jebel Sahaba. History's first large-scale war wasn't fought with guns or bullets, but with bows, spears, and just stone-tipped arrows. 13,000 years ago, in what is now Sudan's Nile Valley, 2 groups engaged in sustained, brutal conflict. The evidence? Well, we have a mass grave at Jebel Sahaba, where archaeologists found 61 skeletons riddled with arrow wounds and blunt force trauma. Some had projectile points embedded in their bones, while others showed healed injuries, proof that the fighting lasted months, maybe years. The reason for this prehistoric war remains uncertain. One theory says it was a racial conflict. The remains belonged to two distinct ethnic groups, one possibly from the Mediterranean. Another theory? A fight over water. Climate shifts were drying up the region, making the Nile's resources worth killing for. This wasn't just a battle, it was an ongoing struggle for survival. And it may have been the first of many wars to come. Number 11. The world's oldest cold case. Imagine a crime scene 430,000 years old. Sound comical? Well, it's not. That's exactly what archaeologists uncovered in Spain's Atapuerca Mountains, where a site known as Cima de los Huesos, Pit of Bones, held at least 28 Neanderthal skeletons. But one stood out. Dubbed Cranium 17, this skull had been shattered into 52 pieces. When scientists reconstructed it, they found two nearly identical fractures on the forehead. The injuries weren't from a fall, they were deliberate. Both wounds were inflicted by the same weapon with repeated force and showed no signs of healing, meaning the blows were immediately fatal. This was no accident. It was murder. Why was the body thrown into the cave? Was it a burial, a crime cover-up, or something ritualistic? The motives are lost to time, but one thing is clear. This is the oldest known homicide in human history. And let's be honest, the killer is definitely getting away with it. Now let's move to Number 10. Cannibalism and dismemberment. We all know the Aztecs had a flair for gruesome sacrifices, but their neighbors, the Acolua, made them look tame. When Spanish conquistadors fell into their hands, the fate that awaited them was something straight out of a horror movie, except worse. Captured prisoners were shoved into tiny, stinking cells, forced to listen as their fellow Spaniards were dragged out, one by one, for sacrifice. Once dead, their bodies were butchered, cooked, and eaten in what can only be described as a ritualistic blood feast. But the most disturbing part? The creative post-mortem displays. One victim, a woman, was flayed, her pelvis put on public display. Then, because that wasn't enough nightmare fuel, a child's severed head was stuffed inside the cavity. Why? No one knows. Maybe it was a warning, a curse, a final stomach-turning insult. Whatever the reason, the Acolua made sure their sacrifices were never forgotten. Number 9. The mass-murdering Maya drought cult. Picture this. Drought has strangled your civilization. The lakes are drying up. Your crops are dying. Your people are starving. You're desperate. How do you fix it? If you were a Maya priest, the answer was simple. Start killing. At Belize's Carablanca pools, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a rain temple where desperation turned to bloodshed. Here, in the dying days of their civilization, the Maya turned to mass human sacrifice, hurling victims into the sacred water to appease Chak, their rain god. Did it work? Number. The drought continued. The sacrifices became more frequent and more brutal. The Maya society crumbled anyway. This was not a one-time event. This was a full-blown death cult, sacrificing people en masse to a god that never answered. Their solution to climate change was ritual murder. It's safe to say, it did not age well. Number 8. Scotland's Frankenstein mummies. Finding prehistoric mummies is one thing. Finding mummies made out of 6 different people? That's next-level nightmare fuel. At Cladhallen, Scotland, archaeologists unearthed 2 bodies buried in a remote village. At first, they seemed normal. But after further study, things got deeply disturbing. These weren't 2 individuals. They were Frankenstein-like creations, stitched together from 6 different people who had died centuries apart. One had been assembled slowly, over hundreds of years. The other? A rush job, thrown together from 3 women who all died around the same time. Why? No one knows. Were they ritualistic creations meant to honor dead ancestors? Were they offerings? Or were they just some ancient society's twisted take on build your own human? We'll probably never know. But one thing is certain. Prehistoric Scotland had some truly unsettling funeral traditions. Is this find creepy? Number 7. The Midnight Terror Cave. A name like Midnight Terror Cave is setting expectations pretty high, but this Mayan sacrifice site lives up to it. Discovered by accident when a looter fell into it, the cave was stuffed with thousands of human bones. Many showed clear evidence of sacrifice, deep-cut marks, ritual blue pigment, and signs of brutal execution. The most horrifying part? At least a quarter of these bones belonged to children, and some of them weren't even local. Evidence suggests they had been brought from over 200 miles away. That's not a casual kidnapping. That's a full-scale human trafficking network, where children were shipped across Central America specifically to be sacrificed. This was a sacrifice on an industrial level. The Maya weren't just offering up their own people, they were importing victims, because when you're desperate to please the gods, local blood just isn't enough. Number 6. To serve man. 7,000 years ago, much of Germany was home to the linear pottery culture, LBK, a group known for early farming and pottery. But at Herxheim, a site near a modern German village, archaeologists found something far more unsettling: mass cannibalism. Excavations uncovered 80 oval pits filled with human and animal remains, tossed in carelessly. At least 500 people, from infants to the elderly, had been butchered, carved, and eaten. Their bones showed cut marks identical to those found on butchered livestock. Even more disturbing? This was just half of the site. Researchers believe many more bodies remain buried. But why? Some theorize Herxheim was a sacrificial site, where victims, possibly slaves or outsiders, were ritually killed and consumed. Was this religion, warfare, or something darker? No one knows for sure. What is clear is that Herxheim wasn't just a village, it was a place where people became food. Number 5. The hand-decorated skull of ancient Brazil. South America had no shortage of gruesome post-mortem rituals, but even by those standards, this one stands out. In 2015, archaeologists at Lagoa Santa, Brazil, made a find that was equal parts shocking and baffling. A 9,000-year-old skull decorated with amputated hands. The left hand was placed on the right side of the face, fingers pointed up. The right hand? On the left side, fingers pointed down. There was no indication of mutilation before death, meaning this was ritualistic, not punishment. Chemical analysis showed the victim was local, possibly a member of the very tribe that killed him. Why? No one knows. Was it an honor, a curse, or something in between? In a region known for bizarre burial rites, this still ranks as one of the strangest human sacrifices ever found. Whatever happened, it left one of the eeriest burials in ancient history. Number 4. Dismemberment in Bronze Age England. In 2013, archaeologists in Thanet, Kent, uncovered something straight out of a nightmare. A sacrificial pit filled with hacked-up human remains mixed in with animal parts. Well, yep, that's just what they found. One man was dismembered, stuffed into a sack, and buried with a cow's foot. 2 children had their limbs separated and tossed in with a cow's head. Slaughtered lambs scattered throughout the pit, their bones mingling with human skeletons. Nobody knows why this horrific mixing of man and beast happened. Was it an offering, a warning, or some forgotten ritual? Well, no written records exist, leaving nothing but a blood-stained mystery. What we do know? The rituals of Bronze Age Britain were brutal, eerie, and deeply unsettling. If this was their version of a community gathering, we'd hate to see their version of a punishment. We mean, how can someone do that? Like, really, we knows everyone is different, but these dudes. Number 3. A Minoan skull-shattering sacrifice. If the Minoans of Crete were known for anything, It was their advanced civilization, intricate art, and highly organized society. But beneath that sophistication lurked something much darker. At Kydonia, Crete, archaeologists found the remains of a young girl with her skull brutally smashed open. Around her, discarded animal carcasses, all killed the same way. Their bones were mixed together before being sealed under a heavy stone slab. Was this a sacrifice to the gods? A tribute to dead heroes? The parallels with local myths, like the virgin sacrifice of Eulamine, are impossible to ignore. This wasn't a one-off event. The Minoans, for all their advancements, had no issue spilling blood when the occasion called for it. Whatever this girl's fate was, one thing's for sure: she was never meant to leave that pit. Well, it's pretty sad. All right, now, let's move to number 2, the site of the Sand Creek Massacre. In 1864, one of the darkest moments in U.S. history unfolded in Colorado. Under orders from Colonel John Chivington, American troops slaughtered a peaceful camp of Cheyenne and Arapaho. Between 100 and 150 people were killed. 2/3 were women and children. The soldiers weren't content with murder. They scalped the dead and took fingers, noses, ears, and even genitals as trophies. Chivington called it a victory, portraying the Cheyenne as hostile warriors. But witnesses came forward, exposing the truth. A congressional investigation later condemned Chivington's foul and dastardly massacre, yet he faced no punishment. For over a century, Sand Creek faded into historical obscurity. Then, in 1999, archaeologists pinpointed the site, bringing the massacre back into public consciousness. Today, Sand Creek is a National Historic Site, the only one in the U.S. with massacre in its official name. What do you think about it? Number 1. Exploratory voyage turned desperate fight for survival. What began as a scientific expedition ended as one of the greatest survival disasters in Arctic history. In 1845, Sir John Franklin set out with 129 men and 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, to find the Northwest Passage. For 2 years, everything went smoothly, until winter locked them in ice near King William Island. Franklin died in 1847, leaving the crew stranded. Supplies ran low, and by 1848, the surviving men abandoned their ships and attempted to walk 1,000 miles through the frozen wilderness to a Hudson Bay trading post. They didn't make it, not one. For over a century, search teams pieced together a chilling fate: abandoned camps, frozen bodies, and bones with cut marks, proof of cannibalism. Some remains showed marrow extraction, the last desperate act for survival. In recent years, both ships were found, solving the final mystery of one of history's most haunting expeditions. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon in the next one.